What's up, y'all? Kevin Kuhn here from Athlete Factors. This is the Athlete Factors podcast, and I'm here with an old friend, teammate, and classmate, Joel Smith. What's going on, Joel?
Not much, man. Just got off of work. Excited to talk to you, buddy.
Awesome. So, you may not even know this, but you were actually my first exposure to strength and conditioning. So, at little old Cedarville University, I remember I was in a freshman level class. I think it was like Intro to Health Professions. And I think you were a junior or senior. I think you were a little late to that class. And we had a project that we had to work on together. I think we did something about creatine. Yeah, and the prof was not exactly thrilled about it. I think she thought it was like steroids or something like that. Yes. But
I think the first creatine I ever took may have had steroids in it because it works well. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if it would have had something in it. They snuck.
Oh man, that's hilarious. But I remember going to your dorm room, and you were like, "Hey, let's look up stuff on in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research." And I was like, "What is that? Like what?" And so you were like opening my eyes to what the NSCA was, and before that I had absolutely no idea, and I wasn't hearing that from anybody else at Cedarville. So you're kind of like you were my intro into this whole thing. So I really appreciate it. Just wanted to let you know.
Well, hey, yeah, I guess sometimes you never realize who you are, I guess, opening up to new avenues of information. So I'm glad that found you. I mean, it's funny because ironically at the time that was happening, I think I had gone through strength and conditioning internships where I'm like, I don't want to do this. Like, I want to be track. So we'll circle back. So here we go.
Yeah. So I wanted to be a track coach as well. And I work with track athletes, but I'm not exactly a track coach per se. So, so yeah, let's give people a quick rundown. So after that, after Cedarville, like what was your career path after that, or academic path? I guess, let's say.
Yeah, academic path. I could say a lot about academics in the sense of just I say, okay, oh wow, you have a master's degree in exercise. But my first job, people would say, oh, you have a master's degree in X Phys, like you must know X, Y, and Z. I'm like, I didn't learn anything from, but
yeah.
That being said, I think I tried to go to a place that I knew I'd be positioned to have good experiences, which was Wisconsin lacrosse. So after Cedarville, I got my master's at Wisconsin lacrosse, it was really a great, beautiful place to study and learn, and really good, good people there. And so I spent time working in the biomechanics lab as a graduate assistant. So which I know, as per what we're going to be doing in our conversation, the focus of research was female ACL tears, particularly, so all the factors that went into that. So we had like a 6-camera, $100,000 setup, and actually that's not even that much money. Back then it seemed like a lot of money, but now I'm like, so I was doing that, and then I was also an assistant coach on the track team, working with high jump. Eventually got into decathlon while I was there, and I wanted to go there because I knew they had a good track team, and I think that I knew that's where I wanted to initially head. And yeah, and then master's in applied sports science, did a thesis in the biomechanics lab on depth jump type stuff, and then that led me into the wonderful career world, which I am now 12 years strong into.
Nice. So after grad school, tell us about your job at was it Wilmington?
Yeah, Wilmington College. So
yes.
I remember at Cedarville, it's like, hey, there's this college 30 minutes away called Wilmington, but I knew nothing about it. So I mean, we didn't even, I think we had one meet there my freshman year. And so it was really fortunate that I got that job, because I felt like I was a little entitled in terms of, I'm like, okay, you get the bachelor's degree, you get the master's degree, you're going to get a job. And then I found out very quickly that was not the case. I would really put all my work in these cover letters and all this stuff, and really research these jobs and track jobs and stuff I thought I for sure would at least get an interview for, and got nothing. But eventually it worked out where I did eventually getting an assistant job at Wilmington College, initially as a track coach, and then eventually I was doing courses in their like sports science and health department, so teaching strength and conditioning and biomechanics, and which that was really cool. Here I am like coaching track. I'm doing courses, and it was a very diverse job, and it was a good entry point for me because I was still at a point of extreme career immaturity, and it was just it was a really good place to be mentored early on, get my feet wet, and start to really just understand a little bit more about everything, not just the human body, but everything. And so that was it, man. That was Wilmington College. I spent 4 years there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember after you kind of left Cedarville to go do your master's work, and then you came back, I was like, oh my goodness, like he's only 30 minutes away. So I remember seeing you at quite a few meets, and yeah, you were around campus every once in a while, so that was pretty cool. It was good seeing you back.
Yeah, haven't been back since I left, but it was around, yes.
Yeah, well, it was good for me personally to see like, oh, okay, like at that point I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to blaze my own trail. There's nobody that I know of who's doing anything to combine like the strength and conditioning side with the sport performance side, or like the actual athletic, whatever sport it may be, to try to combine all of these different aspects. And so it was really good for me to see somebody doing that, somebody that I knew. So that was pretty cool for me. Anyway, so somewhere in that time period, you started up your website. So tell us a little bit about Just Fly Sports and kind of how that got started, and that's really morphed into like a serious, what should I say? It's a huge den of knowledge, is what it is.
Sure. Yeah. So that was, I feel like it's one of those things where I came from a household where it's like the mentality is you go to school, you go to college, you get a job, and you work at that job for X, Y, Z and get X paycheck. And I think I look at who I am really, I think I definitely have a heart of an entrepreneur. I just never, and I've always loved writing. Like I've been writing ever since I was 23, 24, grad school. I always felt like, well, I have all these ideas and thoughts on training. I realize, and I've talked to enough people where I realize I've had this just desire and passion and just turned over just pure training for so long. I mean, when I was 8, I was like reading kids magazines with some special guest person interview as an 800 runner, and she's like, you need to lift your knees higher, which actually that's kind of bull. But I was trying it on the playground and to try to run faster. Like when I was playing tag, like what 8-year-old does that? Okay. And so that I've had and I feel like I've always had a good barometer with what's good training and not, and all these ideas. And so I feel like I wanted to start writing early, and so I've been doing that. And then it was about 3 years into Wilmington. It's just, I felt like I just finally needed to put my money where my mouth was. I've always said, well, I'm going to turn this into a website. And I finally did. I partnered with Jake Clark, who's all the back end stuff on Just Fly Sports, who's a javelin thrower for me. And so that's everything you see today. And as soon as that happened, it's like someone lit a new fire in my butt. I was staying up. I was working on that from like 8 to midnight, 9 to midnight all the time. The energy. And I think the thing I was super excited about was this sense of, you work in Division III college athletics, and it's like, okay, I'm going to make this very little money to recruit my butt off. And that recruiting is the primary success driver. And then you also think in context of what are these athletes getting out of this? What's the graduation rate? Where are they ending up? Is this ethical? I feel ethical what I'm doing. And so it was a really good fuel for me initially. And thankfully it's still going today. And I hopefully I could say it's helped a lot of people. So,
well, I think right along the same lines of what you were saying about how, like, you're a writer. Like, that was right around the same time where I kind of started a little blog. And one time I was back home in Ohio and decided to stop in at an indoor meet at Cedarville, and I think you were there. And so maybe it was it was like one of those things for Coach Scott's retirement, or one of his many retirements, because
Sure.
he made quite
Yeah.
a few comebacks. But
Yeah.
so we ran into each other there, and we were talking, a little shop, and you had mentioned maybe me doing a little bit of nutrition writing, because that was kind of at the time my focus. And so, like, I love writing as well. So that was huge for me to have a platform where I could put up some articles, and I've put up I think a decent amount on
There
your
you go.
website. So that's been great. I've really enjoyed writing for you.
Citrulline malate article, I think, is still top 5 or top 10 on the year and all top pages.
Nice. Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. That's cool. I'll have to shoot you over my new book once it's done. It's all about calculating your calorie needs, and how calories are like your body's currency, and if you want to be able to pay for adaptation, or if you want to save up for something, like, it kind of all comes down to that. So yeah, I think you'd appreciate it. I think you'd get a kick out of it. So all that to say, so you're working at Wilmington. At what point did you kind of transition away from there and head to your current position? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so strength and conditioning called me back. And now I was doing strength and conditioning. I mentioned I was teaching classes, so I was obviously, for the track coach, you are the high performance manager. You do the weights for your team. And I think that's probably the best situation for the most part, unless you just really don't care about weights, which, anyways, a little different topic. But I was doing the strength and conditioning for the basketball team, and I worked with a variety of other sports, and I was also coordinating the interns at Wilmington that wanted to, be strength coaches. So I was creating that curriculum. So I was still really involved in strength and conditioning, but I never had formal I mean, my intern, I did the worst, not the worst internship. It was fine. It was a good dude who ran it, but I did not do a good job in my Cedarville internship in trying to find something that was really specific. I did like the small 6-week internships you had to do there. You had to do like 2 little ones and 1 big one. My 2 little I spent time at Wright State, which actually really turned me off of strength conditioning. I'm like, what is this? Like, it's just screaming in athletes and no like thought process at all. And I was like, oh, if this is it, I don't really want to do this. And so anyways, needless to say, I had started Just Fly Sports. That caught some traction in the sense that one of the track coaches there was reading my articles, and the track team had been through strength coaches, kind of like pop, pop, pop. And it's a high turnover. Track and field strength and conditioning is almost always the bottom rung, because it's always the sport that most of the track coaches want to do their own program anyways, as they should. The best track coaches always have their own strength program because they understand how everything fits together, and it goes beyond just work on the track. And so I jumped at that because I'm thinking, okay, you know what? My dream was always to be a D1 assistant jumps coach. Like for a long time it was, until I started Just Fly Sports, I guess you could say. I realized you can kind of create your own adventure in life. I guess, and which is so freeing. And when do you just think, well, if I work really hard, maybe I'll be a D1 assistant, going from making nothing to making just next to nothing, depending on where you go. But then being your butt off and being gone on this weekend. I mean, not to say that's bad. I mean, I think I would enjoy that job. But there's pros and cons to everything. But so anyways, strength and conditioning called me back, and I took the job there because I was like, you know what, this is what it takes to go D1. I'm going to make the jump, and even if it's just the strength for track and field, I'll do it. And I also work with tennis. A few years later into that, I actually ended up dropping track, and I took on aquatics there, which they at Cal, they have a very fantastic aquatics program, many national champions and Olympians, fantastic coaches. And so I'm working with aquatics and water polo now, and men's tennis still.
Can we say the name of the school, or is that?
Yeah, it's Cal, UC Berkeley. Yeah.
UC Berkeley, yeah. It's a big deal, man.
Yeah.
Some smart people there, and some decent athletes too. Yeah.
It's a great. It's a very different place than it's very different than some of my I guess previous employment, if you will. But it's you realize it's just good to have I feel like my experience has been diverse. So I appreciate all the people I've worked with and all the athletes and the diversity that it all brings forth.
Awesome. So that kind of catches us up. So um, one of the posts that you put up on, I saw it on Instagram. It was probably maybe a month or two ago.
Yeah.
But I was like, all right, this is one of those unique and nuanced posts that somebody who's brand new to the industry or somebody who doesn't care about having an open mind and learning is going to see this and be like, they're just going to keep scrolling. They're not going to appreciate it. So I was like,
the swipe generation. They did not correctly create attention. That one.
Exactly. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, this is perfect. I got to get Joel on to really to dive a little bit deeper into this, just so I can. I think I know where he's going with these, but to make sure, let's bring him on. Let's talk about it. So, so you you titled that post 5 dogmatic coaching principles that still exist in strength and conditioning. So we'll just kind of jump through these one by one. So tell us a little bit about the idea of, here's the concept. It's still prevalent. You're right. You have to squat through your heels. So when is that appropriate? When is that not appropriate? Tell us your perspective on that.
Yeah, man. All right. So yeah, that's, excuse me. So it's funny you mentioned that post actually did decently, but I had a post today that is probably the worst performing post that I've ever had, because the first line of text, if I would actually read the text, was basically, you got your athletes stronger and faster, but you still lost the game. Now what? Smith, Fergus Conley, Cameron Johnson. Basically, it's just like, here's how to look at everything: tactics, psychological, technical. I just think a lot of people don't want to hear that if your job is just to get athletes faster. But there's so much we can learn from it. Anyways, neither here nor there. Squatting through the heels. Okay, so a lot of stuff that I find personal interest in, I learned the hard way myself, and if I learn it myself, it piques my interest. And then I really start to, as soon as I get on something, I really dig in. So like when I wrote my last book, Speed Strength, and that book was supposed to be done in a few months, and it was done in 3 years, because every single chapter has to be the best. It has to be like all these. So at my podcast, I've had probably over 150 guests, and I want to like leverage everybody. And so through the heels, the first, I used to coach it. So it's kind of like this at Cedarville, and this is the beauty of Cedarville right here, is you were coached, but you weren't hyper coached, in the sense of like, and Coach Scott was a great example of this, in the sense that he didn't really coach my tech, but he also knew I didn't want to be coached technically, so he just laid off. But even, I don't know, like I didn't feel like, my gist was that you weren't, or especially in the weight room, like I should just say, in the weight room particularly, I remember being shown some stuff and actually instantly being like, that's not the right way. But then I wasn't like actually coached on technique, but I think that was a good thing. So I'll take you to my junior year, where I jumped my PR of 7 feet in high jump. And this was, I made like insane. Maybe this was before you came then, because my senior year was a little bit of a rough one. There's a lot of lessons I learned there, but I realized my junior year, I just needed to start squatting more, because the year before I was obsessed with power cleans, and that was well and good. But then when you first meet, you go jump 6'1". When you've jumped 6'8" in high school, even though you maxed out your power clean, you realize something's wrong. And so I was just thinking, Boot Sarah talks a lot about ratios, clean to squat, all this stuff. And the weight room isn't that, and the weight room wasn't even the biggest part of my whole deal. There was a lot of other things that I improved and needed to improve. But I remember when I was squatting, it just felt good. And this is key, is this industry is so whole, like, we don't rely on our intuition enough. Coaches don't do enough themselves. They don't get into enough movements. They don't feel enough movements. They don't challenge themselves to be taught by other people about movements. We just say, okay, this is what the NCAA says. I believe them. They're pretty good. And we'll just leave it at that. And so I remember, this is how I squatted, though, is this is what felt good to me, was basically fairly narrow stance, pressure on the balls of the feet, knees go fairly far forward, feel like there's a lot of tension, kind of through the quads a little bit, and keep a somewhat upright torso. That's just what felt good. But yet, 3 years later, when I'm doing the curriculum for Wilmington College, I'm going through the NSCA books. I'm trying to do my due diligence. I'm trying to check all my and I did it largely through strength and Science and Practice by Zatorsky. That was my main text, but I also used the NSCA text. And so I'm like, okay, knees out to the side, go through the heels, like da 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 da. And I'm doing this myself too, because I'm like, oh, this is the way. Like, so this is when I'm 24, 25, 26, squatting like this myself. And what I found just doing this myself, and I'll get to where I started to invoke some experts in my realm, was I got a lot stronger in the weight room, but I started to notice stride length was down. My high jump approach was 70 when I was jumping 7 feet, and now here it is at 67 when I'm coaching at Wilmington, stronger than I've ever been. Still training with athletes, still pretty good at a lot of stuff, but stride length is less. What's going on? And so and my triple jump was worse too, like lots of stuff like that. And so, and I can tell you why that made it worse in just a second. So get to Cal, start coaching there. Someone passes me an article written by Zig Ziglar, who was a host on my show. First person I've ever, someone on Facebook messaged me this. Hey, what do you think of this article? This guy's like, don't squat through your heels. When you squat through your heels, basically I think he said it like locks out your tibia or does a twisting your tibia that's bad. I don't think, and it's going to hurt your knees. And I didn't at the time really think it was going to hurt your knees. I just was like, oh, whatever. But one thing he said that was that really got me and struck me, and Zig's a very intelligent individual, and his thoughts have helped me a lot, was we aren't made to operate on a peg leg. And as soon as you squat through the heel, you are basically neurologically sending the signal to your body in a jump-related motion that you're not going to push through the forefoot, or aka you're not going to pronate, because you have to get to the forefoot to pronate. So basically you are going through a similar motion to jumping, as a fairly athletic movement of sorts, even though a deep squat isn't really necessarily true specific, but let's just say even a half squat. So you're going to give the body something that's similar to jumping, but now you're going to trick it by saying don't go to your forefoot. So what's going to happen to stride length? It's going to go down. What's going to happen? And then I started to look at all these athletes at Cal, these track sprinters, the guys who had been doing a lot of weightlifting through high school and formally trained. The very cerebral, I will do what coach says, I'm going to do, very mindful of it, versus the people who probably hadn't lifted, just more natural athletes. And you could just see the difference in vertical jumps, power off the forefoot of these people who have been trained through their heel. And so essentially you're just neurologically telling yourself when it's time to explode to revert to heel. I know why we'll say go through heels, because the heel is the sensory link to the posterior chain. But it's just sensory. That means you could use it more in maybe a rehabilitation setting. I could see you saying it on the way down in squatting, maybe, but I wouldn't use that. So basically, it's not that far off. To put things simply, it is not that far off from telling an athlete to jump through their heels. It's so from as far as the body and its interpretation is concerned, and eventually, because lifting is a very high survival threat based movement, it's going to really impact the body from a neural imprint, because this is heavy weight. We need to adapt to this to not die and survive and thrive. And if you're telling people through their heels, you're just going to tend to see negative interference there. So yeah, that would be my long, short answer on that one.
Well, it makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me. Like you said, I think there's a time and a place for it. For a lot of youth athletes that I work with who don't know how to control their weight or control their body. Like, I think it's good to cue in different ways, to maybe say like, hey, try shifting your hips back, try getting an even placement of weight on your heels sometimes, right? So I think there's a time and a place, but like you said, if you want somebody to be able to jump as high as possible and they're putting all their weight through their heels, then they're not going to be able to jump as high as potentially they could, right? So,
I do cue, if I cue things, and this is what Zig said, and this is kind of what I follow, is you need to have a tripod. So you need to have your heel in contact with the floor, your big ball, the big ball, the little toe. But then I just let athletes just go on their own from there. And unless I see something that's I would consider extremely wrong, I tend not to say anything and try to let them self-organize. And if their heel's coming up, I'll usually just put a block under a little like wedge under their heel, rather than trying to force them into that at that point. That's just how I tend to roll with it.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, it's like jumping, especially for, let's say, tall athletes like basketball. Like if you're trying to teach them to squat all the time with their heels down, like that's not the way most people jump in the game, right? Like if you're setting up for like a jump ball, or if you're going up for a rebound, it's almost going to be more like a hinge than a true squat or like a deep squat anyway. So doing a ton of heavy squatting for jump athletes, I'm not even sure is always a good use of programming. So, but I guess that's another story. So
Yeah, that could be a different that could be a big question if we wanted to go into it. Maybe if we have time at the end, I guess.
awesome. So let's jump into the next one. So number 2, knees can't go over toes in squatting.
Yeah, no, that's another one that in going through the NSCA guidelines, which I myself, and well, that kind of propagates to. There's a few things that I think that really can hurt athletes. This is one that, okay, so I hope I'm not like kind of making leaps where I shouldn't, but a good example of this would be a lot of people are familiar with Mark Ripito and Starting Strength. Very popular book. Mark is a big guy he's very big on the low bar back squat, which is a very sit back oriented movement.
They just opened Starting Strength here in Dallas. They got their first location. Yeah, I just drove past it the other day. So sorry,
nice.
Didn't mean to cut you off.
No worries. But someone had told me, and there's just two things that I think about that make sense to me. And one is that Mark, I believe, had squatted 600, but his vertical was only 20 inches. And Mark is also very, if you ever listen to him, he's a big curmudgeon about the potential of people to increase their vertical jump. He's like, you might be able to increase it by 2 or 3 inches, but no more. And I think to myself, well, yes, if you low bar back squat and your whole paradigm is sitting back, so you can't load the forefoot and you can't put the pelvis in a position, like when someone does a vertical jump, the knees are going to go over the toes. Try doing a vertical jump without putting your knees over your toes in a standing. You're not going to jump. I don't even know if you're going to be able to get up off the ground much at all. It just doesn't work. It just does not work. And I can get into some more biomechanical details. But I mean, if you watch, just very simply, go watch the NFL Combine verticals or anything like that. And usually you're going to see something. The following is the person will descend to the bottom with the knees not necessarily really traveling forward. But as soon as they go to jump and force redirects, as soon as they move, they start to pronate, is those knees will push forward. So you'll notice those knees pushing forward as the athlete gets onto their forefoot and explodes upwards. So if you're just constantly operating this paradigm of sit back, well, one, you're being to be unathletic. Two is you are, as Taleb would say, you're being fragile rather than anti-fragile because you're not exposing the knees to any sort of stress that's going to help them to build themselves stronger. And so Bren Patrick, knees over toes guys on my show, he's taken tons of people out of knee pain by intentionally taking the knees forward as far as you can. And same thing with Ido Portal. If you look at Ido Portal's stuff, we trained Conor McGregor, big movement guy. I look at his work a lot, especially with what I'm doing now, is he'll have people like do bear crawls on the back of their hands and these like almost quote unquote painful places because he wants them to be robust. Because, I mean, you should ideally be able to intentionally move your body anywhere. You should not be afraid of any range intentionally. It's when you unintentionally go somewhere that, and you don't have the strength for it, that a problem could be created. But Ben said something that was super profound, and that is basically this. And this is what I became, and that's why it really resonated with me, is he's like, I train, this is for basketball, but I think it could be almost for any sport in some senses. I go feet first, then knees, then hips in order of importance. Because modern strength and conditioning is a hips first paradigm. And honestly, it's a hip and low back paradigm if you really look at it and you look how lifts tend to be coached and operated. So then what you get is an athlete who is super strong through the hips and low back. They probably are in a little bit of anterior tilt because that's what happens when you lift too heavy for a long time and without being mindful of it. And then you start to get this place where the tissues of your Achilles, ankles, feet, and knees might become weaker. You never allowed them to become stronger. And now operating under a paradigm that's just hip power. And now you fundamentally changed as an athlete. And that happened to me big time as an athlete in my late 20s and early 30s. And I like 180 that. And I just for reference sake, the last year I dunked a basketball, I think was 31, 32 or somewhere in there. And that was at the heart of like a lot of powerlifting and all that stuff. gave that up. And then 35, 36, here I am. I lift a fraction of what I used to, do a ton of natural play, movement, all the stuff I've learned, and I dunk, probably almost better than I could 4 or 5 years ago. So, and I'm able to now, and it's not hard, and you understand just how the body works. So, that's my take on that one.
Yeah, I think when you're not spending a lot of time focusing on the feet, like the way kind of I explain it to clients is that your feet are communicating with the ground, right? So if you're not starting with the feet first, then it's going to be really difficult for your body to have a conversation with the ground. And athletics really comes down to like ground contact time, ground contact force, and if you can't have that conversation because your feet don't know the language, then tough. So, and I think a huge part of that is, I just thought of like the moment that I understood when the knees should go over the toes, because like I was drinking the Kool-Aid early on, like, okay, like squatting, knees can't go over toes. Like I'm like a few of my professors were contributors to the NCAA book. So I was like, oh, okay, these guys know. So in class, I'm like learning this. And I'm like, this is while I'm at Baylor. And I'm like, okay, like, all right. And then watching someone do a standing long jump, like you said, as soon as they start moving forward, those knees are going way over the toes. And I'm like, okay, well, if it doesn't make sense to squat with knees over the toes, then why are we using the standing broad jump or the standing long jump as a tool? Like, we're training them not to do that, but then we're testing them to see if our training's working by making them do something that they're not supposed to do. And I was like, okay, this is not making sense. Like, I got to figure this out. So yeah, like when it comes to that, and then seeing these basketball players go up for a rebound or go up for the jump ball, it's like, all right, there's got to be more to it than just knees can't go over toes. I think a lot of it comes down to those who are writing the texts came from like powerlifting only background. Like maybe they played a little bit of high school sports, probably didn't play in college, and then continued to lift. All they were doing was powerlifting, right? Maybe not even any Olympic lifting. And so, I think the idea was, like, I forgot who said it, but this is one of the things that I heard early on in my strength and conditioning career, and that was be on your heels in the weight room and on your toes in the sport, whatever you're playing. And I was like, okay, but why are we yeah, like why are we differentiating? Like if the goal is to get as much as possible out of the weight room so that it's beneficial for the sport, then why are we like the feet? In other words, the feet don't matter that much. So you can do one thing over here and another thing over here, and that's fine. And I was like, I don't know about that. I just don't know about it. So that's another one, man. Like it's still super prevalent, and like looking at material that they're even currently using for a lot of different certifications, like entry-level certifications, it's still like when lunging, squatting, whatever the case may be, do not let the knees track over the toes. It's like, well, why not? Like, why not? And like you said, if it's helping people get out of pain, like we really need to reevaluate that as an industry in general. But we'll see if that happens anytime soon.
Yeah, I think it's actually turning from my circles. I feel like it's turning fairly fast. I mean, of course, good. I'm out of touch with a lot of. I mean, I don't know. I just know who I follow, and who tags me in what, and who I see people, catching on to Ben Patrick stuff. And I think even in my own colleagues, it seems to be pretty well accepted. So I feel like it's getting there. I'm sure it will continue to proliferate.
Yeah. No, every once in a while I'll see posts by like Brett Contreras or other big names in the industry talking about how like, no, like you if you're going to deep squat, if you're going to do it, then your knees have to go over your toes. Like, so There's still the whole thing about, weight in the heels, but at least we're making some progress on knees over the toes. So
It's getting there. It's all getting there.
It takes time, man. It takes time. So number 3, knees coming inwards in jumps is bad and must always be corrected. So before we jump into that, I had Ambrose Coleman on a couple weeks ago just to hear his perspective on that idea. A lot of what he does is like rehab for ACL injuries, and most of those, if not all of those injuries, occur from excessive knee valgus, where the knees are coming way in, the arches are collapsing, the ankles are collapsing, there's this medial knee deviation, and at some point, boom, the ACL is just like, hey, I'm checking out, we're done here. So I had him on to kind of have his perspective, but from a performance standpoint, I want to hear your perspective on this as well. So hit it.
Yeah, for sure. So this is a big one. Like I told you before we started recording, this has been a personal interest of mine. I'm writing a 2-part article series on it. The first one, which was some basic concepts, and the second is I'm basically collecting, I'm mining data from all my field of experts to make sure that I'm putting out as good of information as I can. There always exists the mentality of, oh, what we're doing is broken. Well, let's go all the way the other way. The pendulum or the bandwidth is always somewhere in the middle. I will say this first is in working for this second article. So Tim Hewitt's a big name in the whole ACL deal, and he was the first person when I was in grad school at lacrosse. He gave us a presentation on his program, which was basically, oh, look at this girl's knees clacking together when she's shooting a free throw. And of course, if your knees are click-clacky, getting bruises, that's probably not a good thing. Okay, like there's a bandwidth. Okay. But then his solution is, well, everyone's just going to jump with no medial travel at all, which then I'll get to that in a minute, of the negativity of that, because it ties into the biomechanics of the body. And I'm a big let's start with biomechanics, and let's start with the innate function. I mentioned Tim Hewitt because he had research, and I said I was in the biomechanics lab where we did a lot of this work. I wish I had the reference right now, but sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I was going to include it in my second article, which was basically a counterpoint suggesting that something that Tim Hewitt put out, where this valgus is a contributor, there is research in scholastic workout that would suggest that it is not significant. I'll explain why here as I get through this answer. I think that it's very easy to be reductionist in this field, to say X equals Z. I don't think the body is that simple. I don't think it's just, oh, your knee. And by the way, too, I also think this is just my definitions and some definitions of my colleagues is not, I think it's easy to paint everything as knee valgus when there's knees in or there's a valgus moment. So let me start there. Knees in, which this is the good, natural, and normal function that everybody does who is any halfway decent athlete. Michael Jordan, like any you watch pro athletes, pro basketball, anybody who is athletic, Olympic weightlifters, anyone who is athletic does this. So you can't put your head in the sand and ignore it. This is common human nature. I do this. I watch all my old videos, and I do this crazy, and I've never had any knee ligamentous problems in my life. And I swear I've probably done more hurdle hops than just about anybody. I've done probably 1 million plyometric contacts. So you know what? If ACL should have exploded, it should be mine, because if you look at my old videos, I mean, I'm like, and so this is knees in. This is the good knees in. It all is a function of pronation and supination. So most people, and I think you were mentioning that either on the show or before. So pronation is vilified. Pronation is essential. You have to pronate to supinate. It's this infinity of elastic energy return. Mm-hmm. The thing is it becomes a problem when you're over pronating, when you are stuck, when you aren't getting out of that pronation properly. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that becomes a problem. But that does take a little skin in the game to fully understand. You have to watch athletes. You have to observe them. You have to say, okay, look, here's your, and it's all about timing. And my mentor, Darian Barr, he's right on the money. We as a community want simple cause and effect exercises. This is wrong. Here's an extra. Your knee is going in. Here's some clamshells to fix it. We want that stuff because it's easy. It's like super easy.
That's exactly what Ambrose was talking about as an issue with the industry is if you're going to make a correction with excessive knee valgus or excessive medial knee deviation, throwing a band around your legs and doing some clamshells or doing some lateral band walks is not going to fix it. That is like it's the biggest cop out. Like, oh, we just need to do this. Like, no, that doesn't take care of it. So sorry, just wanted to say, like, there's probably a whole lot more overlap in what you guys actually believe, because he totally agrees, and I don't want to defend his position, unfortunately, right here. Like, that's
Sure.
we'd have to get all of us on, which would be awesome, I'm sure. So, but essentially what he was saying is, like, if he could grade it like a 1 through 5, like, I think he said, like, if you're a 4 or a 5 on that 1 to 5 of excessive pronation, like if you're 1, 2, 3, like, that's normal, that's ideal, that's how the body moves. Like, we talk about hinge joints being like flexion and extension based. Like, you have to have both. Well, when it comes to like the arch of the foot, the ankle, the knee, like there's 3-dimensional aspects going on there. It's not as simple as, like keeping everything locked into place. The body doesn't do very well with just keeping things locked into place. There's got to be flex. So, in fact, we were just talking about this the other day. A house that's lived in will last much longer than a house that's not lived in, because, and this was a concept that I learned from my grandfather, who was a carpenter and built houses and churches. A house that's lived in, like, flexes and moves with the people who live in it, and that actually allows it to have an extended life. But a house that's just there and there's nobody that lives in it, like, that thing falls apart real quick. So we were kind of discussing that idea as it relates to the human body. Like, if the body can move that way, it should probably be trained that way. And that was one of the first things that he and I discussed when I moved down here to Dallas back in like 2012. Like, if the body can get in that position, maybe then that should be trained. So I jumped in there, cut you off. I'm so sorry. Continue.
That's good. I like the house example. Makes me feel better being in California and earthquake country. So, what's good? So me and Adarian Barr, I think I was actually the first person to say this. Well, let me just take it from here. So you pronate. When you pronate it, it starts a chain reaction. Tibia internally rotates. Femur internally rotates. Mm-hmm. Stretch loads the glutes. Opens the pelvic floor to accept the viscera down to the pelvic bowl, which in supination, everything reverses. So then the glutes, that band snaps back, you push off, the viscera shoots back up, and you propel forward. This is essential. This is part of knees in. So again, as opposed to valgus, this is knees in. And this is the thing you see in all elite athletes. Pretty much. The only reason you wouldn't would be, and it's a little bit of pelvic orientation. And so I'll get into that in a second. Okay, so valgus would be, Pat Davidson wrote a really cool article that was illuminating, that really sparked a lot of my interest in this. It was called Knees In for the Win, and it was on squatting. And it was just showing just that. Elite Olympic lifters, knees tick in on the way up. They do this thousands, hundreds of thousands of times a year, no knee problems, no problem. And he was linking it to the gait cycle. The way down in the squat is supination. You're on the outsides of your feet. The way up, you're going to pronate. As you pronate, the direction of the tibias will mirror where you're kind of on this inside edge of your foot, so the tibias are going to mirror that. And so I call this like the upside down Y, because I feel like that sweet spot is when you look at, let's say, a bilateral jump, a drop jump, anything like that, you'll see the feet are in a kind of inside edge manner, so they're a little more pronated. This is at this like kind of mid-stance load position when the body's accepting load. And then the tibias will point towards each other, kind of like a triangle. And then you will have the femurs facing up fairly perpendicular. And that's why I get the Y, because if you go too far, it's not really as much of a Y anymore. And that's where that you're developing that eye to say, okay, maybe this is a problem. But the key is then bandwidth. Well, what's good, what's bad, and then there's a lot more there. And so the direction I'm going is feet and hips. If your pelvis is an anterior tilt, and you're not reciprocal, meaning you can't go back and forth. And actually, we have video, so you can see my hands. Yes, it's a pelvis, and it's going back and forth. Mm-hmm. If you're stuck there, and you're not reciprocal, then you're in a very interior. When you have people in anterior tilt, they have a lot of IR, a lot of internal rotation, and not as much external rotation. So, and they also tend to get slammed forward very quickly into that internal rotation, full range, forward motion, and by tipping that pelvis back, not even messing with anything else, you can tend to see some change there. Versus someone who's posteriorly tilted, their knees are going to be out more. They're going to have trouble getting internal rotation, and so they have kind of the opposite problem. And then you can also look at pronate properly, supinate properly, all that kind of thing. So I do think it's a bandwidth. I would say, like, if I watch athletes, to me it's 9 to 15 times out of 10, or maybe 15 to 1, it's fine when you see it show up in athletics. But yet we coach it out of the other 14, which reduces performance, and the chance are the athlete's just going to forget it when they go compete anyways. Their body's going to do what it needs to get the rebound and make the block and everything else that goes with that. So I think it's just very bandwidth specific, but don't coach it out of the 14 to help, to maybe help the one person that it was potentially going to help. And that's assuming your intervention is correct as it is. Again, not just saying clamshells and not just saying, oh, just don't let your knees go that way. Oh, that's terrible. Like, no, the body's meant to move like that. So we just have to know when it's too much and when we're stuck and we can't get out of it.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's kind of my perspective. Like, if you think this is a black and white issue, then you're probably going to do more harm than good. So there's a whole lot of nuance in there, in that bandwidth, in that range where your body's going to do it in order for like when your brain, or when you are telling the brain, this is the task, do whatever you have to do to accomplish it. Like, if you don't understand that in athletics, that's what's going on. Not, okay, I have to do this movement perfectly, and it has to be in this sequence, and I have to do these things. Like, when you slow everything down in the weight room, that's not the way that the body's going to utilize that movement pattern or something like it on the field, on the court, on the track, while you're playing the sport. So, yeah, you have to know not only the demands of the sport, but how the body is going to achieve those demands. And if you're not willing to look at those and then understand that, yeah, there's a ton of wiggle room when it comes to the knees tracking in, the knees rotating in, the what did you use, the knee in position?
Yeah, knee in versus valgus. I just call it health, performance driven knee in. You can't get out of it. You're stuck. There's twisting in different directions, valgus.
Gotcha. So I like that you're differentiating that and not just saying knee valgus is the same as knee in. Like, there's a difference. So that was one of the things I was going to ask you about, like, how much is too much? And you kind of went over that. Like, you have to watch your athlete. You got to know. Like, you have to.
Pain too is the big highlight. I think it takes a lot, to the point where I would say, if it couldn't be easily corrected by a pelvic position or something like that, to just put it in an athlete's head. I'm just so mindful to put it in an athlete's head that they are broken. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you haven't been hurt yet and you don't have pain, and I don't know, maybe it looks like you're a little too far, I don't want to be like, oh, like, wave my finger. Like, we do that way too much in this industry. And we are constantly being proved wrong as we evolve forward in this industry by this magnificent thing we have called the human body, that, the subconscious mind. It's like, have you ever seen those pictures? Like, this whole screen is the subconscious and this little pinhead is the conscious, that we're able to, the body's always doing the best it can. And so my paradigm is, generally speaking, to, if I don't know it like the back of my hand, like, I am 100% sure my intuition is just dialed in that, yes, we need to change this or you will get hurt. And I know coaches like that, like Mike Guadango, who have found the show, is like, he's like, I know when an athlete's going to tear their ACL. And his stuff is more, he talks about, actually, there's, ironically, you said squat on the heels, running just running the balls there. He's like, that's what kills him about football. All the football players are taught to do everything on the balls of their feet, and then that screws them up, and then they tear their ACL. So it's like, wow. I just thought it was kind of funny that that's what your professors were teaching you, is to do basically everything wrong. So I mean, I don't know. I think there's some situations where being on the ball of your feet is fine. But anyways, yes, I almost don't even know where I was going with there. It's just so. I was just saying, like, I am just so careful before I call in a correction or tell an athlete that something on them is broken or wrong. I mean, we want healthy, robust athletes, and for I mean, I do have some success to my name. Like our men's tennis team last year, I think we went the whole season pretty much without losing a player to playing time,
Wow.
which for tennis is big. Like, I mean, I think I've evolved my program to where we're doing some really good things, and so it's just, yeah, I just, you have to be careful when you tell an athlete there's something wrong with them.
Yes, and it's hard to argue with results. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, it's just one season, but if I have to again, then I'll get back to you. So
consistency is key, as they say.
Yeah.
So,
getting there.
alrighty. So that was awesome. I'm so glad that we were able to have that specific topic addressed. So, number 4, brace the core on everything. So
Yeah, I should. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is one of those things that's like, I catch myself doing quite a bit. Like, and early on, it was always like, engage the core. Like, that was one of my biggest cues. And it's so easy when you don't know what to say or what to coach, or like when I'm working with a group of athletes, then it's different because it's, it tends to be easier to pick things out. But like if it's a small group, or if it's one-on-one, and I'm like, okay, I got to make sure that I'm coaching here, and like, man, everything looks good. Like, okay, well, I just got to say something like, all right, just brace the core, engage the core. Like, so that's one of those things that I was like, oh, okay, all right, time for some self-reflection. Am I doing this too much? Am I using that as like just like the easiest go-to when I don't know what else to do, or what else to say, or whatever the case may be? And then yeah, so talk to us a little bit about that, and how that can be that can negatively affect athletic performance if we're priming that, or we're coaching that too much.
Yep. Yeah, man. So I was on a somewhat similar path to you, in the sense of, I know for my slow movements, I used to coach that stuff. I don't know if you know, like, do you know that RKC plank where it's like turn everything on? You know what I'm talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I remember seeing that like 8 years ago or something, 9 years ago when it came out. I was like, whoa, this is awesome. You can get such huge muscle activation through your whole body. Fantastic. Great. Okay. So then I read an article not too long after that, and this is always in my memory banks, it was talking about, just because you turn a muscle on in a plank does not mean that it's going to stay that way at all when you're moving. So you need to train reflexive strength. And I had a hard time with that article because I didn't know what reflexive strength was. So it made my fear bias turned on, my fear of the unknown bias turned on, and I just kind of tuned it out. I wasn't like coaching my athletes to brace their core on much of anything, just like a plank or a position, really, if it was anything. And I don't think that's not going to like hurt you if you do that. I don't. Not for a sagittal plane motion. I don't think that's a bad thing by any means, but I don't coach that. Everything I coach is reflexive now, and I'll get into that in a second. The first person to really get me like, yeah, bracing the core is dumb, like just light bulb moment, was Cal Dietz. Said, okay, brace your core and try to run a 40 as fast as you can. How fast are you going to? You're going to be terrible. You're going to be bound up. You're going to be really slow. And I was like, yeah. You're right, Cal. Like, why are we doing this stuff? And so then, I just had a really good podcast with a couple of neurology guys, and basically they were saying the same thing. Look, intentional parts of the body, eyes, hands, feet. Those are the things that, with the conscious forebrain is at play, it will show up there. The midline or the trunk is entirely reflexive. And not only that, but I find a few layers to this. One is just the general bias of the industry. If you are a strength and conditioning professional, because Cal posted this on social media, he said bracing the core shuts down the nervous system. Instantly, the great divide forms. All the hardcore lifting people are like, no, you're wrong. And I'm looking at the people, and I usually don't waste time on social media like this. I actually, the last 3 days, my wife has had my phone, and it's been glorious because hers got lost, and so it's been glorious. I don't like spending time, but this was one thing I wanted to dig in and spend time going through the thread, because I'm a student of human nature a little bit, and I like to see where people go and come from. And all the people who are pro bracing core are powerlifting, CrossFit, stuff where it's like brace, lockdown, strength. It's like masculine and feminine. Masculine would be the bracing, the rigid. Feminine is the free flowing, or masculine is the structure and feminine is the free flow. We need them both. But the thing is the structure isn't created for the athlete by telling them to consciously brace. It should be created through just moving. Like I don't know. How did Mickey Mantle hit a 700-foot home run in 1945? Wasn't
bracing.
one told him to brace his core. No, I actually
Yeah.
was like, that guy like had a job as a miner, like smashing rocks repeatedly. So
Wow.
that, and I don't think anyone told him to brace his core while he was doing that.
Right.
And Dave Weck said this too, because I think you'll get this like, I don't know, pal-off press or anything like baseball. Even people will talk about this. Oh, when you're hitting a ball, don't you brace your core at the minute instant that no, you don't. Can your body really react that fast to the ball striking the bat to in that 1/1000th of a second turn your core out? No, like,
No,
are you kidding?
there's no way.
It's just pressurization. And so I'm a very I just think it has a lot to do with the mindset. Like in the mindset of the more rigid would be muscles, brace, fight, resist. And then the other side is flow. And I'm not saying that this side is wrong. I'm just saying you need to embrace the spirit of both sides. Yes, you need to be strong enough to do your sport. Your frame needs to be robust enough. Your muscles need to pull hard enough on the tendons to animate the skeleton. Like, yes, I agree with that. But I just think that the sports performance strength and conditioning industry has traditionally been so far to the brace. I'm going to teach you to do a skill. Brace. Like how many versus the sensory system and getting the body to sense and move into spaces and letting the subconscious organize it all. So I just think it's archaic, and I think it's going to go out of style real quick, and it already is. So that's just my two cents. As this industry evolves, and like if all those people who were commenting negatively on Cal's thread, like all the powerlifting, CrossFit people, were actually playing sports all the time and seeing how far they hit the ball and thinking about what they were doing, they would be out of that camp because it just doesn't work in practice,
Yeah, like that's one of those things that like as a former distance runner, like the majority of training that non-running training occurs in endurance athletics is primarily core training, which who can define that? But it's like you've got to do planks, right? And if you're going to do planks, you got to brace. But no one's bracing when they're running an 8K. No one's bracing when they're running a mile. No one's bracing so that whole idea of it's super funny. Like nobody's bracing when they do 40s. What's really interesting though is if you've done very, very little strength training or any sort of conditioning, and then all of a sudden you start doing a lot of sprinting, even if it's short sprints, 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, the next day you're going to feel your core. So something was happening there and you weren't bracing. So explain that one, right? Like all these people who are like, no, everything's got to be braced. It's like, but the body, you can't think about doing that while you're doing an athletic movement. And if you do, like you said, your performance is going to go down. Like the body can't function that way. It's not designed to do that. You're not supposed to have to think about that while you're doing things. So yeah, it's another good one, man. So last but not least, the best way to activate muscles is concentric shortening and squeezing. This is another big one because activation is such a huge buzzword right now, and it's been that way for a long time. But how do you know that you're prepping muscles for the workout? Like during the warm up, are you doing the right things? You've got to activate, you've got to shorten, you've got to squeeze, you've got to turn all these muscles on in this concentric way before you do this eccentric exercise or this exercise where you're doing all the different types of muscle contraction. So what's the deal there?
Yeah, so it's funny. I don't think I was ever exposed to. I mean, I probably was doing it on some degree. I never really called it activation. I don't think I called it. Maybe I did. But the more exposed to mainline strength and conditioning I got, the more I was brought to terms with this thing called activating muscles and all this stuff. But it never helped my performance one bit. Like and it could just be summed up this way. Okay, so Gary Ward, who's been on my show, and we talked about pronation. He has a book called What the Foot, and I think he talks and explains this beautifully. Is the sense that okay, there is like levels of isometric pulses that happen in movement, just pop, 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 like iso pulses. But in just in the context, let's just say pronation. So in pronation happens. We have the internal rotation of the tibia, femur. That stretch loads the glutes, and it's that stretch that allows the glutes to contract. And so by saying, oh, you have sleepy glutes, your glutes don't work, do some hip thrusts, do some clamshells, do some this, that. I'm not nothing. I think Brett Contreras definitely gifted the world with hip thrusts. I have nothing wrong with them. I've used them with track sprinters. I think they are good. But I think that it's good if you pronate and your glutes work in an average normal working stride. And then it can enhance that effect. I think if this is in terms of just performance, human function and performance, is essentially a muscle needs to go to a stretch before it can shorten. And so by just making everything pure concentric, we're not really working with the way the body operates, which it's stretch ranges and stretch loads. And so there's a book that was really, really good. Probably the best running book I've ever read, to be completely honest. Absolutely. It was the best in terms of running biomechanics. And it's called Even With Your Shoes On by Helen Hall. Helen is a student of Gary Ward's, and she has a lot of really cool little acronyms. She's very creative. And she has something called Wujwum, or WUJWUM. And I was like, what's a Wujwum? Well, it's wake up joints to wake up muscles. So the idea that moving your joints move to wake up the muscle. Like Ido Portal, it says just move. It's not. And this is a thing where we think we're smarter than the body by saying, you know what, body, you're dumb. That you, hey, body, that is so awesomely designed, and our best supercomputers won't be able to match your intelligence until 2050. Oh, but you're dumb because you can't turn on your glute. Well, let me give you this concentric shortening exercise to turn it on for you. No, we need to give the body what it needs to naturally allow the muscles to engage, which is the stretching and the shortening. So I like it says, like, Helen's like, wake up joints to wake up the muscles. And I've found that even in like one of the things I really like is like team sports. Like playing basketball, I always get more warmed up to dunk, and I will always jump the highest for dunking after I play pickup basketball every time. You can't create or synthesize or formulate a warm-up that can do that for you. But playing basketball is a huge amount of different joint movements. All the ways you play defense, all the ways you drive, your ankle, knee, and hip are. Yes, three-dimensional. It's an ultimate three-dimensional move your joints warm up, and that's also what allows the brain to feel safe, because you're like re-engaging the sensory map of the body, and the brain is like, okay, I feel safe doing this. I feel safe wiring more power because I'm resensing this little subtle position in space. And I was even on like this breakdancing muse in high school. And I'll tell you what, when I was breakdancing, it enhanced my athleticism, because that's the ultimate like full body wujwum. You're and spinning in every direction, and all these muscles are naturally activating. And so to say that to try to like, basically all the like the clamshell stuff is kind of an artificial, to me it's an artificial man-made way to do the same thing. I won't say that I think it's completely useless. I know you'll get anecdotes, like it was in one of Tim Ferriss's books. I think it was Tools of Titans. It was some guy, Peter Attia maybe, or somebody who he was like, yeah, I did all these hip, a bunch of these hip abductions and extensions and all this stuff, and my running pain kind of went away. And so I'm not saying that stuff doesn't ever work. I just don't think it works with the natural way the body is supposed to operate, which is the direction I'm always heading. I want to know, well, what's natural, what's normal, how do we do this better? So,
yeah, it comes down to that whole concept of, if all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail. Like, there's an appropriate time and place for it. Like, this is another one of the things that Ambrose says. Like, muscles basically follow three functions. They absorb force, they generate force, and they dynamically stabilize. And if you're not training them to do all of those things, then you're probably not going to get optimal performance out of it, right? So if all you're doing is teaching a muscle to apply force or to generate force, but you're not teaching it how to absorb force, or to, like, in other words, to go through that full range of motion, but also to be able to stabilize at any point in that range of motion, yeah, you're going to end up with everybody having, like, okay, here's the way I think of it. Like, the reason that everybody started doing band work, like clamshells, I think was because of this idea that, oh, well, now everybody's got excessive knee valgus, right? So if we put these bands on and everybody's doing that, then we'll fix that problem. Okay, well, maybe that's one end of the spectrum. Even if that was the case where everybody had that issue, now we're pushing them to the other end of the spectrum where, okay, well, now we're going to have the exact opposite become an issue, right? Like if you drink too much water, that's as bad as drinking not enough water. Like it all comes back to that idea of bandwidth. Like you probably shouldn't be focusing on just concentrics for activation if you're doing movements that require you to do eccentrics in dynamic stabilization, which is athletics. You're doing all of those things. So I think that's pretty darn cool.
If we're going to do that stuff, I mean, and do it, you at least want to do it standing too, in the sense where you have pronation and supination at play. You're accepting load in a normal way through the vertical upright. To dumb it down even more, lying on my side is, yeah. So and I think it's improving. You know, I think it's getting better. So I'm an optimist.
Yeah. I think in general, like the industry is getting better because there's people who actually want to see it be taken seriously, because for so long it's been a joke because everybody can just open up a muscle and fitness magazine, or like my professor in grad school said, muscle and fiction magazine, and whatever it says in there, like, oh, okay, that's the case. Or like anybody can go and get a certification and now they're an expert. And the people that actually care about the industry progressing and improving and us understanding the human body better, because it is so complex. It's infinitely more complex than something like an engine or something like a computer. And those things are hard to understand. Like, we don't know the human body yet. We've got to keep pushing our level of understanding and knowledge of it so that we can get it, so we can actually train it effectively and rehab it effectively and all of that. So yeah, anyway, that kind of covers those 5 things. That's been extremely entertaining and engaging for me. So thanks for doing that. That was super cool. So yeah, one of the things I like to do on just about every podcast is give my guest an opportunity to just throw out some advice or a quote that they like, or and it can be sport related, it can be life related. So what's a piece of advice that you have for anybody who's watching or listening right now?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think maybe relevant to the tune of this show, I with all this stuff, I tend to, it's easy to get, I guess it can be negative, to see change not necessarily happening, in the sense of, you see, sometimes I look at how training is done, I'm like, I can't believe parents are paying for this, you know, like, but how much money is getting wasted in this kid's time or whatever, you know, like, at the end of the day, I like Gandhi's quotes, like, be the change you wish to see. And so to me, that's just be a student of what you do, be open-minded. The biggest shift that I had to do, what really was happened about in my mid-20s, was this shift where I all of a sudden didn't know it all anymore, and I had to fully start asking other people. And then the second shift was when I started my podcast, and I really had to start fully asking other people. Mm-hmm. And those 2 things changed, were a huge catalyst to change me in ways as a coach that have just been absolutely phenomenal. So I think that the more that we can, it's just, you know, depart from any sort of negativity. We just need to be the best that we can be, and go out every day and try to make a change in self, you know, and not say, just be positive, give other, you know, your clients and athletes love every day, and you be the change yourself. And I think that the world's always going to be a better place when that happens. So that is quote and thoughts on that one.
Awesome. That's sweet. So how can people follow you? How can they find you? How can they read your articles and get access to all the products that you've made, like all the books that you've written and stuff like that?
Yeah. So yeah, Just Fly Sports. If you Instagram, Twitter, website, I have a new book, Speed Strength, that's out. That's encapsulates a lot of these things, including my own big paradigm shifts in the world of speed training and power training for athletics and things like that. And yeah, justlifesports.com, which many of your own articles can be found on, Kevin. So extra incentive for anyone listening to pop up there. The nutrition section is popping thanks to Kevin Kuhn. So that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Joel, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Dude, this has been incredible. So again, thank you so much. And everybody out there, go like Joel's stuff, go follow him, and you will definitely learn something. So he's always pushing the envelope with regards to being open-minded and learning new stuff. And I really appreciate that. So stay tuned for this next episode. It'll drop next week. Alrighty. Adios.